Pandaemonium chapters in Final Fantasy XIV are over, and it's easily one of my favorite stories in the entire game. It explores several themes like family, duty, ambition, and self-doubt. The characters are rich in depth and rooted in the game's 10-year history. Let's talk about a large piece of the Pandaemonium story, Lahabrea, his wife, and son. But before we get into the details, here is your spoiler warning. If you haven't played through the entire Pandaemonium raid series, save this video for another time. Lahabrea is someone all Final Fantasy XIV players are familiar with, given he's been around since A Realm Reborn. He served as the primary antagonist, guiding the Garlean Empire with ancient secrets to push the star towards another calamity. Now, it's no secret that Lahabrea wasn't the most interesting villain. Unlike Elidibus and Emmett Selk, he's much more overly antagonistic. He enjoys pain and suffering of others, even though we later learn it was incidental to the Ascian's goal of unsealing Zodiark, the Dark Primal who wielded the power to restore the Ancients as a civilization. Elidibus and Emmett Selk walk the same path, but it's paved with good intentions. That key difference makes Lahabrea much less interesting than his colleagues. It also means his eventual death isn't as meaningful. This was the perception of Lahabrea for a lot of players up until the Pandaemonium raid series, myself included. That's when we really begin to understand the man's personality, struggles, and goals. We don't actually meet Lahabrea until the second act of the raid series. Instead, we're told how the man was in ancient times through the words of others. We already knew Lahabrea held a seat on the Convocation of 14, the governing body of ancient society I've talked about at length in other videos. But something we learned from the raid is that he's also the chief key ward of Pandaemonium, a facility far beneath Elpis that contains monsters deemed too flawed for submission. It is here that we're introduced to Ericthonios, a key ward who explains that the creations of Pandaemonium are to blame for his brainwashing and the lack of communication from the facility. That's the reason that the Warrior of Light and Themis are investigating. Ericthonios uses chains in his spells as a key ward and as weapons in his transformed state. This motif will play a part in Ericthonios' journey, but we'll talk about that later. Ericthonios has a troubled past. We learn in the first act that his father is Lahabrea. Hesperos mocks him for being such an inept mage despite his bloodline. Ericthonios himself tells us earlier that he's always struggled with magic. He also has a strong desire to prove himself, even with all that low confidence. This leaves him bitter and irritable, especially towards his father. He paints Lahabrea as a horrible father, husband, and leader. Professional, but cold. The man never praised or encouraged his son. He also never took the time to mourn the untimely death of his wife Athena, the chief key ward before Lahabrea took over. Ericthonios speaks of his mother highly and with much affection. The man believes his father is nothing more than a mad scientist who would do anything and hurt anyone to push his own agenda. It's important to note that this characterization is concerning to Themis. Remember, Themis is really Elidibus, so he knows Lahabrea pretty well. He remembers his colleague is strict and calculating, but that's all out of a strong devotion to the star and its people. We meet Lahabrea in the second act of the story. Well, the two parts of Lahabrea. Long ago, he cast aside the worst parts of his soul. He thought he sealed that crystal away, but it found a vessel and took up Lahabrea's old name, Hephaestus. That's the man who kidnaps Ericthonios and takes him to the depths of Pandaemonium. Father and son also stand on opposite sides of the Pandaemonium problem. Ericthonios believes his colleagues, the other key wards, can be saved, but Lahabrea wants the facility destroyed so the situation doesn't get worse. The real Lahabrea also confirms much of what his son told us about him. He did keep Ericthonios at arm's length, doing enormous damage to the man's self-esteem, but it was done intentionally. Lahabrea believed it better for his son to hate him than learn the horrible truth about his mother. This is confirmed when his son is kidnapped by that part of his soul that he abandoned. Lahabrea is enraged and blames himself for how Ericthonios turned out. He sees the damage, and some prodding from Themis and the Warrior of Light is enough to convince him of his mistakes. Many of those missteps center around Lahabrea's relationship with his wife Athena. The two bonded over their brilliant minds and endless ambition. Lahabrea was always duty-bound to the star, but Athena took great interest in elevating the ancients above their already lofty position on the food chain. She aspired for godhood, initially believing that unlocking these secrets would ultimately benefit mankind. Ericthonios remembers her as a loving and nurturing parent, a far cry from how his father was, but remember, Lahabrea shielded his son from the real Athena. In truth, she was ruthlessly ambitious and carried out immoral experiments to further her goals. She wanted godhood and would do anything to get it. That includes manipulating her own son to a horrific degree, altering his mind so he'd remain loyal to her, crippling his soul so that he would always struggle with magic and cling to her for safety. Also, she could eventually use his body as a vessel to ascend. She was already very driven, but her possession of the heart of Sabik amplified those feelings even more. I won't expand on that any further here, the heart really needs its own video. But Lahabrea saw all of this unfolding. He knew she was dangerous and saw no way to destroy the heart. So while he loved Athena and supported her, he confronted her in her secret lab. In fact, she wasn't even surprised by his intrusion and said there's no better person to kill her. But Lahabrea makes one final effort to understand. Athena merges her consciousness with his, but even after that, the man couldn't come to terms with what she was willing to do for godhood, so he killed his wife, the mother of his son, all for the sake of the star. He cuts that part of his memories and feelings out from his soul. He was Hephaestus no longer, but Lahabrea, a member of the convocation. He sealed those memories in Pandaemonium and took over her role as chief keyword. Hephaestus eventually broke free and helped Athena return. Lahabrea and his family are heavily influenced by Greek mythology. Hephaestus, the god of fire, fell in love with Athena, the god of wisdom. Lahabrea uses fire frequently and is credited with creating many fire-based beings. Athena is very intelligent, so that could translate from wisdom. Gaia, the goddess of earth, conceived and gave birth to Ericthonios. She then gave the boy to Athena to raise. Ericthonios eventually becomes a legendary king of Athens. Athena's schemes in Pandaemonium create several opportunities for Lahabrea and his son to grow. Ericthonios finds courage in a pivotal moment when he's imprisoned by Hephaestus. The villain badgers him relentlessly for his weakness, but the warrior, Themis, and even his father believe in him. It gives the man the strength to break free of his bonds and confront his captor. Lahabrea finally tells his son how proud he is of him. They have a great father-son moment to imprison Hephaestus, sort of like Goku and Gohan using the Kamehameha wave to destroy Cell. The two reconnect in the third act of the Raid series, and it's handled in a very believable way. Their bond is strengthened in the final confrontation against Athena. She tries to tear her son down with all the secrets she's kept about his birth. It's gut-wrenching, considering she's his mother. But Ericthonios is not the boy he used to be, and he won't be manipulated by her anymore. He alone has the ability to stop Athena's ascension. Themis questions his choice, but Lahabrea insists it is his son's decision to make. No one else can do it, and he puts an end to Athena's schemes without hesitation. I mentioned before about how Ericthonios has a motif with chains, and these moments are him breaking free of those bonds. He's no longer chained to Athena's ambition or his father's scorn. He is his own man, walking his own path. Lahabrea eventually restores his emotions and memories by absorbing Hephaestus. He and the warrior discuss the ascian who set the heart of Sabik on the modern world, bringing chaos and destruction. Lahabrea tells us this information is difficult for him to wrestle with. Remember, Lahabrea was considered one of the most unhinged of the ascians we know of. He tells us that given his loyalty to the star, perhaps he would do these dark deeds to save it, even if it doesn't make total sense to him now. Lahabrea reaffirms his duty to the star, appoints a successor to Chief Keyward, and acknowledges that he and the Warrior of Light will never see eye to eye, a reference to his eventual fate in the future. I mentioned in a previous video that I was confident that the Pandaemonium raid series would give us a well-rounded perspective on Lahabrea, those details and nuance that we got with his counterparts later in the story. And in Pandaemonium, we did get it, and it's a really good story. Lahabrea and his family explore how love, duty, desire, and self-doubt can all be confronted. I really enjoyed it, but I want to know what you think. What was your favorite part of the Pandaemonium raids? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing so you know when new ones come out. Take care, warriors, and I'll see you next time.